Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. As we're getting started, a couple of just quick announcements. Number one, the chat is enabled, and so we're hoping to have this be interactive. And please go ahead and type questions, type comments along the way. Also, if you would be willing to just go ahead and introduce yourself so we can see sort of everyone that's here. And as I said, we really want this to be as open of a space as possible. So it'd be great to get to know folks as people are joining. I'm Mindi Thompson. I am the director of CCWT, and I'm really excited to be talking with you all today about designing meaningful and evidence-based college internships. So I'm going to share some of our work at CCWT as well as what we know about the great work that's happening across the country from different folks and different stakeholder groups. So again, if you're willing to just type your name, your little information in the chat, that'd be great to get a sense of who all is here. Right, so we got someone from Philadelphia, Milwaukee, we see some Madison folks, Santa Clara University, Connecticut Department of Public Health, Yale Internal Medicine. Great. So as we're getting started, I want to just acknowledge what has made this work possible and actually the work that we do at the center. So first and foremost, I want to say a big thank you to our funders. These are folks who over the years have supported our work, especially currently Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as Strata Education Network, as well as the NSF. I also want to acknowledge all of the people that make this possible. So you see here some photos of our team members who have been involved in this college internships work that we're doing here internally within the CCWT at UW-Madison. We have two of our graduate student project assistants, one of whom is on our call today. Hi, Nicole. We have Missy Clemens, who is our program manager, research program manager, and she also is here today and supports all of the back end, everything that we do for our projects within the center. And then we have our three interns. So I'm going to talk a little later about our current internship program, but we currently have three undergraduate student interns from here at UW-Madison, and they really have been instrumental in helping to launch our internship program internally, helping us to co-create and really refine some of our resources. So I would love to hear a little bit about why internships. So another way of saying this is like, why did you show up today for this webinar? But how does your current role intersect with the college internship space? And if it doesn't at the moment, what are you hoping to learn from engaging today? So again, just go ahead and type that in the chat. And just a side note, if you see me looking this way throughout, it's because my chat is over here on my screen. So again, how does your current role intersect with the college internship space? Or if it doesn't right now, what are you hoping to learn from engaging today? Great, a preceptor for interns throughout the year, run our communication department internship course, and may have funding to develop a few internships for communication major students. That's fantastic. I support employers who recruit for internships at Temple, as well as students seeking internships. Plus, I manage on-campus internship program. So lots of different roles and ways that you're engaging in this space. All global studies majors at UW Milwaukee complete an internship, hoping to find ways to make internship class better. Managing research studies and get a lot of interest from undergrad and grad students to get involved with projects. I'm in charge of identifying internships for students. I run our hub for experiential opportunities. Great, so it seems like we have a variety of folks in sort of different places within the internship landscape and even more as we're coming in. And one of the things that I'll try to talk to today is the importance of thinking through about who are all of our stakeholders. What do we know as being important within the internship space? So our objectives, first I'm going to review some of what we know from the research, and this is around values of internships as well as challenges. We're going to talk through some best practices that we know from a body of literature, both that done within CCWT as well as lots of folks across the country and actually around the world that are doing internship related research. And then talk about designing evidence-based internships. What does this mean? What does it take? What are the challenges associated with it? And then where to next? And the where to next, I'm really hoping that we all can start to engage in conversation and be thinking about this and thinking about the problems that we're trying to solve together. So first I want to start by saying, and I think this is evidenced in the variety of folks we have in our room today, in our webinar room, which is that the internship ecosystem involves a lot of different key players. So of course it involves the scholars as well as the funders or the people who make this work possible. But the three key players that we're going to speak about today and really attend to are students who themselves are seeking and taking and completing internships, employers who are helping to fund, helping to support, helping to create and offer internships in their organizations, and campus liaisons or facilitators. This is a really a broad swath of folks who encompass a lot of different roles on campuses. And so as many of you already wrote in the chat, the different roles that you have that serve in this function where some of you, part of your job or all of your job is intersecting with the internship space. Maybe it's creating connections with employers to offer internship opportunities for students. Maybe it's offering career support or academic advising around students to complete and take internships. Maybe it's teaching courses that are focused on supporting students once they're in internships, right? There's a lot of different ways. This sort of third bucket is what I would say is really kind of titled on different campuses. So we'll start with the value of internships. Here's some of what we know. So students talk about the value of internship in a whole host of ways. So 40% of recent graduates felt that the college did not fully prepare them to transition to the work that they were doing in other words, to their first job. And what's interesting about this is that those students who had completed an internship felt more prepared than those students who hadn't. Internships increase the odds of having a good job upon graduation. And this has implications for longer term earnings. So what this means is that students who have completed internships are more likely to get a job that's aligned with their interests post-graduation. And over time, because of what we know is the importance of having a first job, our earnings tend to increase. We know that Gen Z, which is the generation that our current undergraduate students, the majority of our current undergraduate students in the US fit into, we hear that they have higher levels of loneliness. We know that they lack community and that they report higher mental health distress than any other age group. And the reason this is important to notice is because one of the things that we do at CCWT is we attend to students, and we attend to students from a career development that has a holistic perspective, which includes their career wellness, which includes their overall well-being and mental health. And so it's also important specifically within the internship space is because we know there's some evidence to suggest that when students have an internship, they may experience decreased loneliness because they're connected to fellow peers, they're connected to a supervisor, they're connected sometimes to a team. It also helps to then increase senses of community and belongingness, and that it can over time have some impacts on their mental health because they may feel more connected, they may feel more higher self-efficacy, which allows them to feel better about what they're doing. They may feel that they have some more purpose or meaning. as a result of engaging in the work that they're doing and completing tasks that they see happening. We also know, and this is according to recent data from the Handshake Internships Index in 2025, that students described the following in terms of the value of college internships. So first and foremost, or I should say the sort of response that got the highest endorsement is to build valuable skills. But students also talk about things like to figure out what jobs I'd like to pursue, to make professional connections, to make it easier to get the job I want, to earn money while I'm in school, and sometimes to a lesser extent to fulfill degree requirements. And we know from some of our own data, and I think Jen, I saw you here. So one of the things we know is that internship expectations for requirements and then what it means later on really does vary across majors. So 32% of students who valued this, it may be that those students are all sort of comprise a certain major. So here's what we've heard from our own research. These are interviews or focus groups with students that really speaks to students' perspectives and students' own words about the values of internships. And I'm going to read through some of these aloud, but feel free to read them on your own. Again, at CCWT, one of our primary missions is to ensure that student voices are centered in all of the work that we do. So here's some of what we've learned from students. I'll start sort of top left if you're following along. So one student said, I was undecided when I came in my freshman year, and having an internship in marketing made me realize that I don't want to be in marketing. So that was definitely something that was very pivotal in making me rearrange what courses I took and what major I decided on. So this was a student who was reflecting back on their previous experiences as an intern and really deciding to pivot as a result. The second is the first thing that comes to my mind when it comes to career readiness is getting a job in that field, an internship. And this one is interesting because this came out of some focus groups that we did where actually what we were asking students was to describe what does it mean to be career ready, or how will you know when you're ready to transition to a career? So this wasn't actually a question intended to be specifically about internships. And yet one of the things we heard over and over within these focus groups was that students cited the value, the importance, and sort of the pressure they felt to get an internship. Another student said it's really important to take some internships. You should try what actually work is. It's not something you have learned from class, it's totally different things. When I was at my internship, I found out there are a lot of small things that you have to learn. How to interact with your leaders, how to cooperate with the teammates, etc. So this speaks to those values, those what we typically call transferable skills. You'll hear me use that term later, that students learn as a part of engaging in an internship. One student described the process of their internship really facilitating their first job. So the student said, I had to resubmit my resume, my updated resume. There was no interview involved. My boss just approved the conversion from an internship to full-time employment. And then finally, this last quote speaks to one of the students who spoke to the value of internships, the pressure they were feeling to get internships, but also brought in what it's like to try to find internships, especially in the area in which they live. So in the small town that I lived in, there weren't too many opportunities for students to just go to even unpaid internships. So next we'll pivot to the value of college internships from employers' perspective. So 58% of employers believe that recent college graduates are not fully prepared to enter the workforce. There's a lot of information we're hearing about this. Those of you, probably everyone who's here today, this is a major talking point currently within our sociopolitical environment about whether higher education is worth it, whether students get what they need to have in order to, sort of the investment in higher ed to be worth it. And so it's not surprising that we're starting to see a lot of this conversation and a lot of these data points really being thrown out and being thrown out in a way to use them to say, oh, higher ed doesn't matter, or we should disinvest in it. When actually, if we dig into these data a bit further, what we know is that we see some pretty significant differences. Those college graduates who are prepared are college graduates that have certain experiences and certain connections, and we see some of those major inequities. But employers also see the value of internships as an opportunity to engage with future talent, to learn from interns, and to convert those interns into future jobs. So, this conversion piece is often cited as a primary reason that employers choose to create and employ interns. Create internships and employ interns in them is the hope is to transition them to a full-time position, and they've already invested time and energy, and therefore it requires much less time, energy, and resources if they could hire those folks full time upon completing their internship and completing their degree. It's also the case that employers view internships as an opportunity to bring in young talent and to support the next generation. So this slide, these are a few quotes from employers. We have conducted some interviews with employers to talk about, what makes internships something that you do at your particular organization. What are some of the factors that impact how that experience looks, and what do you see as ways in which internships need to adjust or change. So here's just 3 quotes that I pulled out of what we heard from different employers. And I'll start at the bottom left. So that's always our why. It's easier to convert. They, meaning prior interns, don't cost as much to get up to speed. So there's that obvious business purpose. So that speaks to that conversion piece I mentioned on the previous slide. The next quote on the top right, leaders within the organization get motivated by bringing on interns because these interns are coming in with new ideas, new initiatives. So it almost lights a fire under the leaders. So again, speaking of the value of interns coming in with different perspectives, interns coming in with new ideas, some employers talk about the ways that interns have helped them to solve problems that they've been working on within their organization for a number of months. The third is employees get a great chance to hear different thoughts and insights and inject feedback and thoughts from a different generation or group of people that see the world a bit differently. So again, it's speaking to the different perspectives that employers can gain and can benefit from when working with interns. The value of college internships for post-secondary institutions. And again, this is where we see the current socio-political environment certainly is having some implications and shaping some of the conversations that are happening around what's the value of internships alongside sort of what's the value of a college degree, right? So one of the recent data points is that many Americans would pick a Google internship over a Harvard degree as the best path to a good job. And they would rather, from an employer side of view, hire a quote B student with an internship over a quote A student without one. Secondly, many sectors of the workforce favor real world experience over credentials, and so speaks to the value for post-secondary institutions to invest in creating, supporting, facilitating students in taking internships. And that internships offer opportunities for students to connect their academic work to work relevant skills to showcase to potential future employers when it is the time for them to be on the job market. And yet, there's all of these values. We see values from all different angles, and alarming problems exist that should concern us. So the first is that internship demand is far outpacing supply. So what this means is that students, we hear this over and over anytime we are talking to students about internships, about their access to them, about their interest in them. Students want internships, and they actually feel a very high level of distress when they cannot access them. They talk about feeling like they're not going to be successful later on in their careers if they can't even get an internship. They talk about wondering whether it's worth it to continue in their chosen major or even sometimes in their degree completion because they're not able to get an internship. And they compare themselves a lot to students and their peers who have internships and feel a lot of pressure as a result. There are, however, not enough internships for the students who want them. So this is some recent data from that Reach Capital published that 41% of the class of 2025 applied to at least one internship through Handshake, compared to 34% of the class of 2023. So you can see here, it's just demonstrating that the number of students who are seeking internships is growing. This is a further breakdown of this sort of supply-demand issue from a Handshake Internships Index that was published recently. And so if you look at the chart on the left, basically what we see is that over time, and the top bar for each of these disciplines or fields is the one that is the most recent 2024-2025 data. The green bar, the third one, is 2022 to 23. So this is really charting a 3-year time period. And what we can see is that within the past 2 years, across the board, the number of internships posted across industry sectors has declined. If we look at the right side chart, we see the opposite trend, right? We see that every year, the number of students or applicants who are applying to each internship posted is increasing. Again, I want to be really clear, these are internships specifically posted to Handshake. So this is not representative of what's happening across all internships across the country. And the data are likely not that different, right? This is consistent with what we hear from students, consistent with what we found in our own longitudinal data. There are also tremendous inequities that exist in terms of who's able to access internships and how well people are able to engage in them. And this is across a number of indicators. And, you know, I should have said this up front, but I've listed citations for our slides today. This is by no means an exhaustive or fully inclusive list. But we at the center keep a growing kind of continuously update the internship research. So one of the things that we know is that there are inequities across pay. So who has access to paid internships and who has access to unpaid internships, right? We heard from one of our participants earlier who said, I couldn't even get an unpaid internship in the small town that I was trying to get one in, where my community and my family are. We see enormous inequities across gender, across students' choice of major, across race and ethnicity, first-generation college student status, social class of the students' family of origin or family at present, international student status, where international students are shut out of accessing certain internships, and geographic region. So this is sometimes around where an individual student's family is, where they would need to be in order to complete an internship and still have access to housing. So the next challenge or issue that should alarm us is that there's just a lot of challenges when it comes to internship programs. And I'm going to talk through some of these now. We're going to come back to some of these at the end. But as those of you who are involved in the internship landscape and placing students in internships, creating internships, you know that these are incredibly difficult to scale, right? This has been perhaps the growing chatter that is happening online around like, we need to move away from this focus on college internships because they're too difficult to scale, they're too difficult to create and sustain. They're also labor intensive to build, right? It takes a lot of work. It takes some expertise and knowledge that not all of us have. And if we're the ones who are trying to create an internship or employ students in an internship, it's not always easy to do so. And for those of you whose primary role is trying to facilitate connections to potential employers for students to take internships at, you know that there's not enough support on campuses to support that infrastructure. It's also the case that those campus employer partnerships take time to develop, right? They really are relationship building. And once they're established, they sometimes are really difficult to sustain because a particular partner who is at the organization, who was the primary point of contact, they get a new job and they leave that organization, right? And so then you're left to start over. It's also the case that effective supervision is challenging because to be an effective supervisor for an intern, a person needs to be invested. They need to know how to actually supervise and how to supervise in a way that's effective for undergraduate college students. And they need to be rewarded for the labor. And oftentimes, what happens, and this is something we've learned from the employers that we've talked to, is that there's this feeling of sometimes people are pushed into being a supervisor or a manager for an intern because that's their own supervisor's way of believing like they need to be able to do this before they can supervise staff because we know they're not ready to supervise staff. But for some reason, there's this thought of like, oh, well, we'll just let them practice on the interns. And so, as you can imagine, sometimes that works out, a lot of times it doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I just threw a lot at you, but curious what other challenges you're experiencing or noticing related to college internships. And if there are responses to this question, please go ahead and type them into the chat. You're also more than welcome to unmute yourselves and for us to have a conversation together. Yeah, funding, major challenge. Yeah, the pressure for paid internships. And Christine, you asked a question, I think I missed that earlier, wondering if the pressure for paid internships has impacted employers' interest in hosting them. Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we don't actually know the answer to that question, right? I can surmise what we've heard more anecdotally or what we've seen folks talking about, but it's unclear how much that has been a major deterrent versus some of the other factors around what creates this supply and demand issue, what creates pressures internally for organizations to scale back. Let's see. Students not understanding the benefits of pivoting for skill development. Yeah, no, there's sustained funding, challenges with remote supervision, motivation from the intern if they aren't in person. Yeah, I think it's such a challenge that, you know, certainly I experience personally of sort of thinking about what is the gains and losses of remote supervision versus in-person supervision and how do we ensure that the motivation can be sustained. I will also say, and this is sort of previewing what we'll talk about in a bit, but we don't actually know a lot about can a fully remote internship be as effective as a fully in person? Can a hybrid internship be as effective as a fully in person? Let's see. First years and sophomores feeling pressured but unable to get paid internships. Yeah, so it's this notion that students right away feel like and are getting the message we need internships, right? And feeling that pressure to get internships. And yet they are even harder to access as a first year student with very limited experience or very limited training who may automatically be sort of just shut out from even being considered for an intern position. And then what can happen is over time, and this goes back to that mental health piece, if students feel that pressure, they don't get one the first time, they aren't successful the second year, then it can really start to become that internalized pressure, that internalized sense of, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be here. Communication is a perennial challenge. Communication breakdowns between interns, preceptors, and program managers. Yes, absolutely. And that really speaks to that piece around this relationship building and relationship sustaining is so challenging. You know, it's interesting, Tali, is in the literature, there's a lot of folks who are saying best practices is to make sure there's good communication between campus and employers, right? Stakeholders in both places. The problem is nobody knows what that actually means, right? We don't have any evidence to support or to tell us, how do we do this? Educating employers about Department of Labor Fair Labor Standards Act, trying to educate employers on why requiring students to obtain academic credit for an internship, particularly an unpaid internship, can be challenging for many students. Yes, absolutely. So being able to, you know, both advocate with institutions as well as advocate with employers and the disconnect that's happening, especially when it comes to things like academic credit, who's going to require that, who's incentivizing that, who's paying for that. Students tunnel vision towards specific internships and not considering other near field internships. Yeah, this is something that we definitely are seeing from students. Is it's not only a pressure to get an internship, but it's also this pressure of, I need to get the perfect internship that is going to allow me to sort of have that direct pathway to conversion, and it has to be within my major interest area. One of our staff members at CCWT has done a lot of research on the value of internships outside of students' major. So this is something we're hoping to be able to share some more evidence for the value of students taking an internship, even if it is outside of their major. So that's Dr. Ronlu. If you're curious, can get in contact with her. Attitudes about career development, internships not being a primary role of the university or a professor's job. Absolutely. So this is something that is a huge challenge that we hear folks saying like, oh, well, we can't do these internships. We can't scale these internships. So we need to all of a sudden go a different direction. The problem is when we think about what that direction is, number one, we don't have evidence to know what works and what doesn't. And number two, it usually involves relying on some other folks who don't know that this is part of their job or never were trained that this is part of their job. Or in fact, maybe it shouldn't be the job that they're doing or that they're being paid to do. So we'll circle back to that piece a bit later. Great. Well, in the interest of time, I want to keep us moving to our next part, which is how might we design meaningful and evidence-based internships? So again, I'm going to summarize a lot of what we know from the literature. There's a list of citations, and Missy, if you're willing to put that in the chat, this is our sort of resource list that we continuously update about every year. So we're actually getting ready to update it again. But here are some of what we know are the metrics that matter when it comes to college internships. They are paid, and not only are they paid, they have needed compensation packages to cover costs of living. Obviously, this is also a challenge, as many of you mentioned. The length. So there's some recent evidence that internship optimal length is perhaps 1 to 6 months, with sort of a curvilinear relationship, meaning that in the middle of that 1 to 6 months is perhaps the ideal beneficial time period for internship length. Of course, this varies, right? It varies depending on major, it varies depending on particular industries. There's a clear contractual agreement. So this happens at the stage of even putting out a call for applications for interns, that it's really clear what the expectations are, that there's a contract that's signed before the internship begins. Treating students as full-time employees. And this doesn't really mean like they're treated as full-time employees, because obviously they're not full-time employees. And especially if they're working as a part-time internship, then they shouldn't be expected to be treated as full-time employees. What this really refers to is this idea of we're giving the interns meaningful work that is connected to developing either their interest and their skills in particular projects or tasks, or their skills and their ability to gain information that will help them to be successful as they move forward. So more specifically, they have access to and are working on meaningful, varied, and goal-focused tasks. That there's a connection being made of the task to their major or their discipline, or if not, that it's focused on transferable skills. And these are those skills that students are going to need and employers want from students outside of their major, right? So it goes back to some of those data points on employers don't necessarily care as much about a particular major as they do around making sure that students have particular skills and abilities to adapt in new environments. Giving interns access to problem-solving opportunities that helps them to think through problems, that helps them to develop solutions. Attentive, available supervision that's balanced with intern autonomy. So what this means is we want to be providing supervision that is on point, that is there, that is open, that is receptive. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're giving the interns some level of autonomy to work on their tasks. Regular and direct feedback, and networking connections. So this recent quote from Inside Higher Ed, I think, speaks to some of what we just saw in terms of the metrics that matter. Company culture is a key factor in determining whether or not a student is willing to return for a full-time position. So it's about the overall experience that interns have. I think this also goes back to the question posed in the chat earlier about, or the comment about fully remote internships and what that could mean in terms of this company culture piece, especially if the company itself is not a fully remote company. So when we set out, I guess a little over a year ago, Missy and I set out to develop our own internship program for undergraduate students at UW-Madison. And one of the resources that we drew from, in addition to this body of literature that we had been working on for a long time, developing for a long time, as well as learning from all of our colleagues, is the internship scorecard. So this was written and published by Dr. Matthew Hora, as well as some of our other team members at CCWT. And I'll say it was published in 2020. So this is 5 years old, right? Things have changed dramatically in the world of work and in the landscape of higher education. And some of these key metrics or key components of what we can think about as design elements of a college internship still hold true or still have some value. And I'm not going to talk through each and every one of these, but it's the program purpose and the format, it's program quality, it's supervision and mentoring, it's skills development, it's student development, and it's equitable access, right? So these are things that most of this was covered in the previous two slides, and in the past 5 years, some of that newer data that has come out has really shaped and further refined and honed what we know about designing effective internships. For our internship program, we were focusing on a few different pieces. And again, I'm not going to read through every one of these, but just want to highlight a few things. So task related, we really were focused on developing competency checklists for students. We wanted to make sure that they had access to both student-focused individual one-on-one supervision as well as some group professional development, and that professional development was really focused on transferable skills. So not all of our interns were doing internships in their major or their discipline. And so this group professional development focused on transferable skills is where we were able to do some of that translational work. We also focused on coaching and supervision, as well as skill development and equity. So some of the challenges this was the first year of us launching our own internship. Part of what our mission at CCWT is to create tools and resources for folks to really put the data into practice, to really be able to apply what we learn from some of the empirical research that's happening either by our team or others. And so what we learned ourselves as in sort of creating and hosting this internship program, one was because there was a lack of pre-existing systems, processes, and framework, we were sort of creating, modifying, co-creating along the way, right? So this was something that was an iterative process. We had let the student interns who we offered positions to know that this was going to be happening this year, know that they were our inaugural group of interns. And they were really excited about this process. And of course, there are ways in which next year's group of interns are going to have a different experience, right? Because we have these pieces established and in place. The other piece I spoke to is sort of this idea of knowing that it's important that students get the connection of tasks to their own disciplines and majors. And it speaks to this challenge that employers or supervisors can have, which is if the tasks that need to be completed don't exactly align with their majors, what does this mean, right? How do we manage that in a way that's a benefit for both parties? And so for us, it meant trying to think creatively, but it also meant that piece around focusing on the professional development more broadly and the transferable skills more broadly. And then third, it was completed during the academic year. So students were employed 10 to 15 hours a week during the semesters in which they were taking classes as full-time students and doing extracurriculars and all of the other things that they were doing. We did, however, and we're still in the process of creating and getting really excited to be ready to share out some of the tools and resources. So one, the career competency checklist, an employer guide. Another example is, we're creating workshops and facilitation guides and workbooks to help students, especially when it comes to some of these curriculum pieces, as well as some of this focus on translating into the emphasis on transferable skills. So I want to pause here and ask for those of you who have been creating internships or already have internship programs that you're running, what have you experienced in terms of your own successes and challenges when you're designing and implementing the internships? And again, I'd love for folks to type in the chat or if anyone wants to jump in and talk live, that's great too. What have you noticed? Anything that's working particularly well? Anything that hasn't worked at all? Being as clear as possible with supervisors and employers of how evaluating interns will work, encouraging them to use evaluation from the first one-on-one meeting to guide conversation. Yeah. So that, I'm assuming this is a helpful, correct me if I'm wrong, Holly, but yeah, so this idea of really needing to be clear up front around some of those evaluation metrics and to use that as a way to ground the relationship from the beginning. Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a surprise at the end of the semester, absolutely. Other folks, any other successes or challenges or things that you've noticed in your own work in this space? Okay. Well, I will keep going in the interest of time, but feel free to keep typing and we can come back. So I wanted to make sure we end and save some time for discussion and conversation. of where are we going next, or what do we need to be thinking about next? So I've talked a lot about this notion of how do we stimulate growth in creating internship opportunities, right? And all of the challenges with doing so. And a few key questions I think remain. On the one hand, we could say that this sort of for lack of a better word, campaign to get the importance of college internships as a high impact practice for career development and career readiness. It seems like that's been pretty successful, right? We have some evidence to support that at least students have gotten that message pretty clearly. And the challenge now is students have this message and they're internalized it and they're feeling very anxious when they can't access internships. So one thing we really need to be thinking about is how do we scale growth in internships and do so in a way without sacrificing quality, right? So there's some new organizations who are starting to develop micro internships. There are some organizations that are developing these other sort of fully remote internship experiences as a way to offer internship options for students. And we really don't know, and we don't have any data on whether those are effective, whether they're helpful, what students' experiences are with them. We also need to be thinking about like, what does it actually mean for a campus to invest in internships as a key priority or as part of a strategic plan, right? What level of monetary investment would be needed? What are the incentives for campuses to do this? What are the incentives for the folks who are working on campuses in either specific internship related roles or, as was mentioned earlier, faculty teaching certain courses? What are the incentives for them to do so? And then what's the return on investment for campus if they do decide to make this a priority? How will they measure whether this has been effective? What metrics will they be asking for or needing? The same is true for employer perspectives, right? So how do we think about what employers' capacity is? How would we help employers increase their own capacities for establishing internship programs so that they can employ more interns? I think part of that is creating resources and curriculum and supervisor training workshops so that they feel like they don't have to do all that on their own, perhaps is a way, right? What are the incentives for employers to offer internships and what's their return on investment? So Just Capital is an organization that looks at a variety of metrics for employers and releases those every year. Is it something that if they were to include, or if an organization was to be included in this list as being particularly doing good work and offering college internships, would that be a way to have it be perceived as a return on investment? I don't know, right? These are questions. These are, I don't have answers to these, but I think these are some of what we want to be, need to be. I hope we will all be in conversation about as we're moving forward. We also need some rigorous evidence on a few things, right? We still need to know, like, what's the most impactful program characteristics and for whom, right? So we have started to gather a pretty good body of evidence of those metrics that matter for effective internships. But what we don't know is for whom, right? Is it the same metrics that are important for a student who's a chemistry major as for a student who's a journalism major, right? Are the same metrics important for someone who's a first generation college student versus someone who's a continuing generation college student? We need rigorous evidence to know what are the barriers and supports to implementation and what are the barriers and supports to scaling, right? We all talk about that. We all, I think, feel this, right? And yet we don't actually have that evidence to know what is going on. What are the things that are impacting this? And then I think third, if it's not internships, then what? And I have this question in here because I think, again, given the current moment that we're in around higher ed and the sociopolitical landscape around readiness for work, there's a lot of conversation of like, oh, we just need to abandon internships and we need to invest instead in something else that's going to prepare our students to be ready for the workforce when they graduate. The problem is we don't know what that something else is. Some people think it's other work-based learning experiences. Some people think it's making sure that every class that is taught on a college campus has a career task, real world application where they're connecting with an employer, right? There's all sorts of ideas about what this might be, and sometimes even some pressure, funders throwing their weight behind certain directions. And yet we don't have evidence to know what is the way forward if it's not internships. And maybe some of you have ideas about what that is as well, or things that you've seen are effective. We also need some communities of practice. So as you've heard me talk about throughout, one of our goals at CCWT and part of our mission is how do we create opportunities for connection? How do we create opportunities for conversation, for learning from one another? Certainly, I've learned from you all today and hearing your experiences, how they align, don't align with my own or with some of this body of research. But we really need to think about how can we further incentivize and strengthen our partnerships. That's with those three stakeholder groups, but it's also with one another, right? What do we all need? What would be useful in supporting ourselves to make sure that we're doing this work and that we're learning from one another? We're not recreating the wheel every time, that we're sharing those resources. This can help reduce those silos and also the competition. You know, one thing that wasn't mentioned, but often is the case, is that when we have employers that are good campus partners, quote unquote good, in the sense that they offer internships, that they're connected to our students, one thing that can happen is even within a particular campus, even sometimes within a particular department, there becomes a lot of competition that we need to figure out who's going to connect with that employer, who gets to be the person who's the point person. And that doesn't really help anybody, right? That speaks to, you know, if we departments that have this pressure of you must have each of your classes connect with an employer to do a organization-based project. What we see is that there's becomes sort of this cutthroat competition of who gets to connect with those employers. Finally, shared resources, tools, and curricula to ease implementation and enhance experiences. So as I said, one of the things that our goal in creating and launching our own internship program was partially like, okay, it's time to practice what we've been learning and practice what we've been preaching, so to speak. And then part of it is we did that with the intention that we were going to create resources to share out. So yes, I see the employer guide, and yes, we are working on that. I don't have an exact date for when that's going to be released. I think Missy and I are really going to dig into it this summer, and so maybe by end of summer, early fall, we'll have some of these ready to be shared out. I also, before we wrap up and just hear other thoughts, ideas, or needs, I just want to put a plug in. We also have a fall conference. So if you're not aware yet, we have a fall conference. It's hosted in Madison. Missy, if you could put the link to it in the chat. We would love for any and all of you to apply to present at our conference, and the application, well, I guess it's a proposal, is very brief, so don't be alarmed. Or to attend. So I think one of our goals in hosting our annual conference is to make sure that we're in conversation, that we're bringing folks together to share ideas, to share resources, to share best practices, and to partner and connect moving forward. So the link about the conference is, Missy just put that in the chat if you haven't seen it and might be interested. So what else? What else in terms of what other thoughts, what ideas, what needs, what questions do you have as we wrap up together today? Yeah, okay. There are other models internationally where students work full time for a period of time during their college years, thinking the sandwich here in the UK. Redesigning degree programs in cooperation with employers would be interesting. A more intentional meld of school and work. Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Christine, because a lot of the internship literature, actually until relatively recently, probably the past 5 years, the majority of it has been from folks in countries outside of the US. And so there has been this emphasis and this focus on the blending with the world of work and actual real world work experiences that some of our international neighbors and folks across the ocean have been doing a lot better at and have done for a lot longer than we have really thought about this. And I'm thinking collective we, as in folks in the US. Okay, looks like maybe the fall conference link didn't go to everyone. Not sure why. That maybe is a Zoom issue. But Missy, if you could post that again, or I could try to copy and post it. What other questions, thoughts, ideas do y'all have as we wrap up today?